Hello students, today we will study our macroeconomics topic excess demand and deficit demand. Excess and deficit demand. Introduction. If equilibrium level exceeds the full employment level, there occurs excess demand. If equilibrium level falls short of full employment level, there occurs deficit demand. Now what is full employment level? Where all persons get employment. Equilibrium is defined as a situation where the plans of all customers and enterprises in the marketplace match and the market clear. In equilibrium, the average quantity that all enterprises wish to sell co-equals the amount that all the customers in the market wish to purchase. In other words, market supply equals to market demand. The cost price at which equilibrium is reached is called the equilibrium price, and the quantity purchased and sold at this cost price is called the equilibrium quantity. Now the next is excess demand. Aggregate demand greater than aggregate supply, corresponding to full employment level of output in the economy. When aggregate demand is greater than aggregate supply, corresponding to full employment level, when there is full employment in the economy, then there occurs excess demand. It gives rise to inflationary gap. Now what is inflationary gap? We will read in our next slide. Inflation means general rise in prices. What is inflation? General rise in prices. Okay students, excess demand, aggregate demand required is less than aggregate demand actual. It was assumed that after Great Depression of 1930, economy can work below full employment equilibrium. There all resources are fully and efficiently utilized. So we can't increase the production. Then it directly affects the general price level. This creates the situation of inflation. Now what is inflationary gap? Keynes in his pamphlet entitled How to Pay for the War 1940 explained inflation in terms of inflationary gap. According to him, inflationary gap exists when at full employment income level aggregate demand exceeds aggregate supply. This means that due to increase in investment and government expenditure, the money income increases, but production does not increase because of the limitations of productive capacity. As a result, an inflationary gap comes to exist, causing the prices to rise. The prices continue to rise so long as the inflationary gap exists. Professor Kurihara defined inflationary gap as an excess of anticipated expenditure over available output at base prices. An inflationary gap arises when a government chooses to finance even its normal expenditure through monetary expansion in a time of full employment. It can also occur during a strong private investment boom, such as might result from massive innovations, opening of new territory, etc. If the monetary authorities are willing to accommodate increased demand for money. However, the important cases of inflationary gap are those associated with the government expenditure on war or war preparations. To illustrate the concept of inflationary gap, let us take the example of a wartime economy. On the supply side, suppose the value of gross national product is rupees 800 crores at pre-inflation prices. If out of this the government takes away output worth rupees 150 crores for war purposes and output worth rupees 650 crores is left for civilian consumption. Thus, rupees 650 crores is the value of available supply of goods for civilian consumption. Now take the demand side. Suppose that the money income paid to various factors of production is rupees 1000 crores. If out of this money income the government takes away rupees 100 crores by way of taxes, the total disposable income left with the people will be rupees 900 crores. Again, if the community keeps rupees 50 crores as saving, then the net disposable income will be rupees 850 crores. This is the actual money with the community for spending purposes. But the total supply of goods available is worth rupees 650 crores. Thus, there arises inflationary gap worth rupees 200 crores, that is 850 minus 650 crores. Now the next is reasons for excess demand. First, rise in propensity to consume. Now what is propensity to consume? This we have already done in our aggregate demand topic. Propensity to consume, ratio of consumption expenditure to income. Excess demand leads to increase in spending power. Due to this, propensity to consume increases and propensity to save falls. एक्सेस डिमांड हम कब करेंगे? जब हमारे पास ज़्यादा मनी होगा. हम उस मनी को खर्च करने के लिए हम मार्केट में जाके क्या करेंगे? हम डिमांड करेंगे. तो उससे हमारी प्रोपेंसिटी टू कंज्यूम यानी कि इनकम और कंजम्पशन एक्सपेंडिचर की जो हमारी रेशो होती है वो इंक्रीज़ करेगी. एंड प्रोपेंसिटी टू सेव, हमारी जो रेशो है सेविंग की इनकम के प्रोपोर्शन में, वो हमारी क्या करेगी? डिक्रीज़ करेगी. तभी हमारा क्या सिचुएशन अराइज होगी? एक्सेस ऑफ डिमांड वाली सिचुएशन अराइज होगी. ओके, नाउ द नेक्स्ट इज रिडक्शन इन टैक्सेस. There is inflation, that's why government decides to cut the rates. From there occurs increase in disposable income. अब गवर्नमेंट ने ये सोचा कि हमारे प्राइस बहुत ज़्यादा राइज कर रहे हैं, तो उससे हम टैक्सेस में रिडक्शन कर देते हैं ताकि जो हमारे कंज्यूमर्स हैं या सिविलियंस हैं, हमारे कंज्यूमर्स हैं, उनको क्या हो, उनको ज़्यादा हेडेक ना हो. तो गवर्नमेंट क्या डिसाइड करती है कि रेट्स को हम कट कर देते हैं. जब हमने रेट्स को कट कर दिया गवर्नमेंट ने, तो हमारे पास जो हमारी डिस्पोजेबल इनकम है वो ज़्यादा बच जाती है. और जब हमारी डिस्पोजेबल इनकम ज़्यादा बच जाती है तो हम क्या सोचते हैं कि हम उसको कहीं पे खर्च कर दें. तो जब हम खर्च करने मार्केट में जाते हैं तो हमारी क्या हो जाती है? एक्सेस डिमांड वाली सिचुएशन क्रिएट हो जाती है. नाउ द थर्ड इज़ इंक्रीज इन गवर्नमेंट एक्सपेंडिचर. Owing to its expanding commitments for the development as well as welfare projects in the economy, गवर्नमेंट अपने एक्सपेंडिचर में इंक्रीज़ करती है. क्यों करती है? सोशल वेलफेयर के लिए. डेवलपमेंट करना है इकोनॉमी का, जैसे रोड्स, कंस्ट्रक्शन ऑफ रोड्स, कंस्ट्रक्शन ऑफ एजुकेशन सेक्टर हो गया, हेल्थ सेक्टर को करना है, उसमें आपको खर्च करने पड़ेंगे गवर्नमेंट को पैसे. ओके, नाउ द नेक्स्ट इज इंक्रीज इन इन्वेस्टमेंट. When there is excess demand, there increases the rate of investment. Producers will start increasing investment because they have to pay low tax rates, so they can spend their money in investment. Next is fall in imports. There is increasing prices of international products, so government decides to reduce its import. Due to this, our excess product left creates excess demand in the domestic market. Rise in exports. Owing to lower domestic prices in relation to international prices, when there is lower prices, there creates excess demand. Producers decides to produce more goods. Deficit financing. It means generating funds to finance the deficit which results from excess of expenditure over revenue. The gap being covered by borrowing from the public, by the sale of bonds, or by printing new money. If there is more money with the public, people will start demanding more, then it will lead to excess demand. Now, impact of excess demand. First, effect on output. As we are already at full employment level, so there is no resources required to be utilized. Second, effect on employment. As we have already employed all the persons, so there is no one to be given job. Effect on general price level. As aggregate demand is more than aggregate supply, it leads to inflation. So these 3 points are the impact of excess demand. Effect on output, effect on employment, and the last is effect on general price level. Okay, students. Now, next is deficit demand. When aggregate demand less than aggregate supply corresponding to full employment level of output in the economy, it gives rise to deflationary gap. Aggregate demand, aggregate supply being perfectly elastic, it converts with aggregate demand at a lower level of output lower than the full employment level of output in the economy. This is the situation of underemployment equilibrium. In this, aggregate demand required is more than aggregate demand actual. Now, what is the situation of deficit demand? When aggregate demand is less than aggregate supply corresponding to the full employment level of output in the economy. Full employment means where all persons get employed. Now, the next is deflationary gap. This is the difference between the full employment level of output and actual output. For example, in a recession, the deflationary gap may be quite substantial, indicative of the high rates of unemployment and underused resources. A deflationary gap is also known as a negative output gap. Okay, students. Now, reasons for deficit demand. First, decrease in propensity to consume. If there is more saving, then there will be deficit demand. People start saving more for their future. Second, increase in taxes. As tax rates gets increased, people will be left with low money to spend. Third, decrease in government expenditure. When government will get less taxes from the public and they don't have money to demand from the market, then demand will get decreased. Fourth, fall in investment expenditure. Any reduction in investment implies a reduction in aggregate demand. When there is increase in interest rates, businessmen will start investing less. Fourth, rise in imports. When international prices will get lowered than domestic prices, then the aggregate demand of domestic goods will increase, leading to deficit demand. Last, fall in exports. When there is higher prices of domestic goods, people will lower their demand. This leads to deficit demand. Now the next is impact of deficit demand. First, effect on output. If there will be deficit demand, then there will be excess stock left with the producer. Due to this, they will start producing less. Second, effect on employment. There occurs involuntary unemployment. It means when people are willing to work but they don't get work because there is less demand in the market. Third, effect on journal price level. Deficit demand causes the journal prices to fall due to lack of demand for goods and services in the economy. Now the next is excess and deficit demand in the three sector economy. Three sector of economy includes households, firms and government. Formula of aggregate demand is equal to consumption plus investment plus government expenditure. Okay students, now the next is phases of trade cycle. A trade cycle refers to fluctuations in economic activities, especially in employment, output and income, prices, profits, etc. It has been defined differently by different economists. According to Mitchell, business cycles are fluctuations in the economic activities of organized communities. According to Keynes, a trade cycle is composed of periods of good trade characterized by rising prices and low unemployment percentages, altering with periods of bad trade characterized by falling prices and high unemployment percentages. Now, there are four phases of trade cycles. First, depression. Second, recovery. Third, prosperity. Fourth is recession. First phase is depression. During depression, the level of economic activity is extremely low. Real income production, employment, prices, profit, etc. are falling. There are idle resources, price is low, leading to a fall in profit, interest, and wages. All the sections of the people suffer. During this phase, there will be pessimism leading to closing down of business firms. Second is recovery. Recovery denotes the turning point of business cycle from dispersion to prosperity. In this phase, there is a slow rise in output, employment, income and price. Demand for commodities go up. There is increase in investment, bank loans and advances. Pessimism gives way to optimism. The process of revival and recovery becomes cumulative and leads to prosperity. Third phase, prosperity. It is a state of affairs in which real income and employment are high. There are no idle resources. There is no wastage of materials. There is rise in wages, prices, profits and interest. Demand for bank loans increases. There is optimism everywhere. There is a general uptrend in business community. However, these boom conditions can't last long because the forces of expansion are very weak. There are bottlenecks and shortages. There may be scarcity of labor, raw material, and other factors of production. Banks may stop their loans. These conditions leads to recession. Recession. When the entrepreneurs realize their mistakes, they reduce investment, employment, and production. Then fall in employment leads to fall in income, expenditure, prices, and profits. Optimism gives way to pessimism. Banks reduce their loans and advances. Business expansion stops. This state of recession ends in dispersion. So these are the four phases of trade cycles. First, dispersion. Second, recovery. Third, prosperity. And the last is recession. Okay.